Well, hello, students. It is good to be back with you once again, and I hope that you are enjoying the Interpreting Contemporary Culture class. This week, we're going to get into one of my favorite topics, really, the values, goods, and the matrix of culture. I am calling it the language of pop culture. So many things and so many projects have come from this particular area because really, while we define culture as that which we can make something of, if we're going by Crouch's definition, certainly some of what we are able to see and that is available to our senses is about the matrix of pop culture that we see. And there's all sorts of resources, theological and otherwise, in regards to interpreting this this aspect of culture. And so today we look at the language of pop culture. Very exciting things. Part of what I want to help us understand is, again, that we all have a language and we communicate value and belief and assumptions, etc., through that language. So, how do we communicate values? We find ways of creating expressions that show value, and language is part of that. I hope that you picked up in Livermore last week that language is not just about words on a page, that language is also symbols upon which we pin values and assumptions, beliefs, etc., about the way the world is. So uh, we have all sorts of ways of communicating value through language. What is the right language? Well, there are obviously words. We use words on a daily basis. In the US, we use English primarily. Increasingly, of course, it's becoming Spanish. In other places in the world, it's other languages. But it's not just words that we communicate with. We communicate with symbols. There's all sorts of symbols that mean a great deal that say nothing, uh, at least verbally. You take political symbols. I was explaining to my daughter the other day in regards to politics and what the donkey meant and what the elephant meant, and perhaps even during Cold War era, what the bear meant. Of course, the donkey meaning Democrat, the uh, elephant meaning Republican, and the bear being Russia. So we have all sorts of symbols that we use. Uh, Another item really that may get lost because it's so common to us are the arts. The arts are this extreme portion our of our pop culture, of what we see and hear and view around us, that we forget that this is a large part. This is a large part of the language that we have around us. Livermore writes on page 113 in your book, to learn a culture's language is to learn the way it organizes its thinking and view of the world. Well, several of the ways in which we uh, organize and we understand, in which we learn, maybe I should say, a culture's language is through these three things, not just the words, not just the symbols, but certainly the arts as well. So, what kinds of pressures does this put on us? We want to desire to develop a cultural quotient. So, what does it mean for us? Well, it means we willingly partake of as many languages as possible in as many cultural bubbles as possible, knowing and understanding not just the words, but the meanings and the values that are behind the words, behind the symbols, behind the arts. We're going to get into the arts here momentarily, but understand that culture largely gives expression to their values, their beliefs through the arts. They give visual expression to what we think, what we feel, what we believe, what we value. Think about music, think about visual arts, think about dance. All of these sorts of arts give a sense of what we value, what we believe, what we assume. Now, there's all sorts of uh, synthetic expression to subgenres of language, per se. Um, Maybe there's an in between category of how we express value. And these categories certainly communicate values, but maybe not as concretely as we would like in other pieces of language. Take bits of popular culture that we have around us all the time: sports, gaming, electronics, and other devices. Maybe we can even look at celebrities and status or dress. All of these different things give expression to language, knowing and understanding, again, not just the words, but the meaning behind it. What do our sports and our gaming say about who we are? Think about the fact that college football, it's fall, so I'm thinking about college football. But college football is not just about X's and O's and players on the field, it's big business. And of course, we've seen all sorts of examples in the last decade of how uh, temptation can come across the students who are playing, and the universities where these students are playing because of the money involved in the sports. Take the billions of dollars taken in by the NFL every single year. Sports is a large part of our culture, and it says something about who we are. Think about the arts. Think about the arts. I want you to think about the arts of all kinds, maybe as a subgenre of language. Arts give physical, symbolic, sensory, available expression to the deeply rooted values of culture. Think about this for a moment. Marketing specialists will use our senses to communicate the value of their products. I was talking with uh, an employee at Hy-Vee not long ago, and they said that Hy-Vee will actually vent the bakery into the middle of the store as a manner of trying to get you to buy more products, to value the bakery. Manufacturers will bottle the new car smell for their vehicles to try and create in your psyche a good sensation. To be able to think back to a time when you remember that new car smell. I'm having you read Van Hooser, Everyday Theology, Chapter 2, Theology in the Supermarket. I just want you to devour that. That when we sit at the supermarket stand and we look at the magazines, that this isn't just a way of looking at magazines, but it's the world telling us how to live and what to value and how to go about living everyday life. Everywhere from our dress to who we should date and how we should handle relationships. All of these different sorts of things are right there available to our senses in the theology of the supermarket. So I hope that you will look at that and devour it and really take some hints on how we go about looking and valuing or looking at and evaluating the values and assumptions and beliefs, etc., of our culture based on what's available to us at the supermarket aisle. Other things that you might think of. Modern art, you can look at modern art in the gallery. You can look at music. Maybe it's R&B or country or jazz or hip hop um, or classical music even. You can look at films, you can look at theater and architecture. One of the ones I think that gets missed is how architecture oftentimes frames our thinking and our value systems. Visual imagery such as graphics and symbols, certainly television and even fashion. There's all sorts of things to be said in regards to fashion and other folks' values and beliefs, etc. The arts can do, in its verbal form, can do what language in its verbal form sometimes is incapable of doing. It can move us to tears, it can expose our emotions, it can drive us to question and maybe even provide affirmation on the other side of that. It can expose us to what is really real reality. The question is, how do we tap into that? Well, one of the ways I want to do that is by talking about the language of movies. I love movies. I have been a movie watcher just about my entire life. And so I thought an easy way for me to help you in looking at pop culture would be to look at the language and the importance of understanding movies. Here's a question that I would really ask you to think about. What's the first movie that you can remember seeing? What's the first movie that you can remember moving you in some way? I remember one of my very first movies was Flight of the Navigator. It was a Disney film that uh, was all about this boy in a spaceship. I remember that I wanted to be that boy. I remember that I wanted to go out and be in outer space. And for the longest time, I'm wondering if that very film really influenced me in wanting to become an astronaut when I got older. It was just so impressionable. I thought the robots and the technology were incredible. I dreamed of being able to go up in a spaceship and be with NASA. The point is, whatever movie you can remember seeing first, it probably moved us in some way. It probably had some effect on us and our psyche in some way. Maybe early on in your childhood you saw a scary movie and you've been scared of certain things ever since. Um, Movies move us in ways that very few other things can. So let me ask you this question. Why should we pay attention? Why should we pay attention to movies anyway? Think about this. Maybe the reason we should pay attention to movies is because people watch movies, a lot of movies. Think about how many movies that you have watched in the last month. I'm not just talking about going to the theater, I'm talking about Netflix in your room. I'm talking about Amazon Prime or a DVD in your player. How many movies have you watched? See, people are watching movies. Societies around the world share instant access to movies. We should pay attention to movies not just because they show they're another language that show value and belief and assumption, not just because they can move us to tears and show our emotion, but because people are engaged with movies. If we can engage movies, perhaps we can engage people. Again, going back to the very first lecture that we shared together in regards to allowing and interpreting contemporary culture and allowing interpretation of culture to help us in reaching other people for the gospel. Gaming systems aren't just boxes for electronic games anymore. They're conduits for the newest movie releases. I have a Wii at home and I have access to Amazon Prime through it. Maybe you have a Wii or an Xbox, and it's not just about playing games, it's about watching new movie releases as they come out throughout the year. Society is watching movies. We as Christians cannot alienate an entire segment of the population by ignoring movies. I picked up this quote a while back from Robert Johnston in his book Real Spirituality. He says, "They remain in the 21st century our primary storytelling medium, interpreting reality for us and acting as a type of cultural glue. Given its importance as a means of cultural communication, the cinema has become a significant contemporary language in need of understanding and explication." So, the question that I want to get at right now is, well, what do movies do? What do movies do? Well, one of the things that movies do is they educate. I was just watching last night the opening of this fall's edition of 60 Minutes. And it was interesting that they had an article, a video article, on what's happening in the Middle East right now with ISIS. The interesting thing, and the reason I bring it up here, is that ISIS is using movies and media to educate the masses concerning their agenda of who the infidels are. They educate. Movies educate us. Stalin, going all the way back in history, Stalin in Russia used film as a media to communicate their propaganda. Well, that is still happening today. Lots of governments really around the world control the media. Why do they control the media? Because they want to control how people think. If you can control how people think, in large part, you're going to control how they respond, how they act. In 2005, the White House lobbied major studios, writers, and directors to add anti-drug messages in their films. Why did they do that? They did it because they recognize the power of film to educate the masses. Another quote from Johnston in his book: I meet people occasionally, he says, who think motion pictures, the product Hollywood makes, is merely entertainment, has nothing to do with education. That's one of the darndest fool fallacies that is current. Anything that brings you to tears by way of drama does something to the deepest roots of our personality. All movies, good or bad, are educational, and Hollywood is the foremost educational institution on earth. What Hollywood more important than Harvard? Yes. The answer is not as clean as Harvard, but nevertheless farther reaching. I'm going to ask you to reflect this week in your discussion posts on the idea of Hollywood being the foremost educational institution on earth. What movies do? They educate. But they also do more. They affect us. Movies affect us. They tap into us emotionally. They show us something about life. Why do you suppose I love watching It's a Wonderful Life every single year? It's wonderful. It's really about a film, not about Christmas, although it happens around the Christmas season. But this film is really about the impact of one life. It's my favorite movie because someone gets to see, perhaps like none of us really do get to see, the importance of our life for the others that we impact here on earth. That's what this movie is about. It brings me hope. One man doing what may never be heralded as significant by any history matters. Life has purpose. This is why I love this film. By the way, throughout this lecture, one of my hopes is that you will stop the lecture and that you will go to the Moodle page. And I have organized a whole bunch of different scenes from YouTube in movies that I hope that you'll take a look with me in sequence so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about as I go through. If you look there in just a little bit, you'll find that there is the last wonderful scene of It's a Wonderful Life. Perhaps the scene that most captures what this movie is all about. The hope of a life's purpose, of one man making an impact in a community. Another movie that I've enjoyed over the years is Mr. Holland's Opus. I enjoy Mr. Holland's Opus because, again, it has this similar sort of hopeful theme, life and how we choose to live it, and the friends that we make along the way, well, they matter. I don't know that I can think of too many times that I've seen Mr. Holland's Opus without crying in the end, because of just how important life can be, that what we think may be insignificant turns out to be extremely significant. Not only are they educational, talking about movies, not only do they affect us, but their social impact is incredible. Movies impact us socially. Think about this. When Bambi came out decades ago, the hunting industry the next year decreased in total revenue from 5.7 to $1 million the year after it was released. It's all the kids telling their dads, "You can't go hunt Bambi." There were reports after Finding Nemo came out several years ago that said a few large city sewers systems were backed up because thousands of children flushed their fish down the toilet. Why? Because they wanted to free them into the ocean. Social impact. Many decades ago, maybe even 25 to 30 years ago, when E.T. came out, Steven Spielberg's famous film, there's scenes in the movie where this extraterrestrial comes to eat Reese's Pieces. After the film was released, Reese's Pieces sales went up 65%. It's interesting to note that I believe both Skittles and M&M's were given the option before Reese's Pieces, and they would have enjoyed the sales of 65% increase the next year following the appearance in E.T. Movies are becoming more and more prominently the shapers of how people perceive history even. Think about this. Perhaps how we perceive some of the Civil War has to do with our perception or our viewing of films like Gone with the Wind, or Generals, or maybe even the 1998 film Saving Private Ryan. It's not politics or economics, but entertainment that is arguably the most pervasive, powerful, and ineluctable force of our time. Again, that was a quote by Johnston. So movies, they educate us, they affect us, they impact us socially. But here may be the surprising one. They impact theology and religion. Movies can help us change people's frame of reference toward the reality of the gospel. Now, I want you to understand frame of reference. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here talking about frame of reference. And I want you to really think about looking at the video right now on Moodle. I want you to think about looking at the video on the vanishing tank and the idea of a frame of reference. The frame of reference. Look at the vanishing tank to help create a visual for what we mean by frame of reference. The idea is this: we need faith to help us see what is unseen, but that is real. We need faith to help us see what is unseen, but that is real. In a Christian sense, life and all life comes with troubles, difficulties, problems, death, health care issues, etc., will still be there, but our frame of reference to the truth changes. You might say that we have a sense of frame of reference when we talk about theology. We recognize that there is an absolute truth. We accept that there is an absolute truth, but the reality of it, of the whole matter is, we cannot know absolute truth absolutely. It's beyond our ability to see absolute truth absolutely. And so what we are saying is we have a map. We have a map to the larger territory. The, we have a map to the larger territory. I live with the Bible and the church as my frame of reference. Because of some of the facts of relativity, because of some of the facts of relativity, all frame of references have a view of truth they choose to believe. I will live for it, die for it, etc., which deepens the reality of faith. Not a matter of saying that there is no truth, but recognizing that I cannot see objective truth the way God does. So I believe in faith or by faith that there is a God and He knows the truth and that there is absolute truth. I believe that by faith, that He knows that there is a God and He knows all the truth, the absolute truth. But we cannot stand outside of our eyes to see what we are seeing, if what we are seeing is really real or not. We all have a map through which we read the larger territory that I'm calling absolute truth. The postmodernist says that there is just frame of reference, which is a contradictory statement because that is an absolute that goes beyond the frame of reference. We would have to say, well, that is just your frame of reference, and you have to believe that through faith. Who is human? Who is human? Can artificial life exhibit human qualities? Lines between cyber life and biological life oftentimes can be grayed in movies, but again, how we look at it through frame of reference has everything to do. Postmoderns blur the line of ethics, of right and wrong, of acceptable and unacceptable. For example, Dexter, the very popular, I believe, HBO series, a serial killer who kills serial killers. So when we think of frames of reference, sometimes there are movies that will try and blur the lines between life of humanity, even between humans and animals, etc., etc. So I want you to look at The Vanishing Tank as a way of trying to visualize what I'm talking about frame of reference. We need faith. We need faith as our frame of reference. We choose to believe that there is a God, one God, and that God knows absolute truth, and that He has given us this special revelation of His Word, so as to understand the territory. But again, this is a map to the territory. In a Christian sense, I think I've said this, life and all life comes with troubles, but we have our frame of reference that helps guide us through those things. Movies, film give us a chance to help people see the truth, the really real reality through faith. Movies can help us communicate the gospel in really powerful ways. So, frame of reference, be sure to check out that particular video. What's next is I want to talk to you about the suspension of disbelief. The suspension of disbelief. When we walk into a movie theater, we suspend disbelief in order for the movie to move us, to speak to us, to affect us. For example, how many movies have we gone into where there's guns blazing and the hero manages seemingly against all odds to make it out of the building alive? Well, if we didn't suspend our disbelief, we would probably just sit and be critical of every movie we've ever seen in this regard. In some ways, when we enter a movie theater, we click off something in our heads that says it's okay to suspend our disbelief for a moment. The idea is not for us to shut off our brains every time we walk into the theater, although at some level we must allow the story to be told. Otherwise, we'll simply be critical of what is not real. But to learn the technique of how movies tell the story. Thus, we can suspend some sense of disbelief to enjoy the story, but not so much as to blindly and without thought or amusement accept every manner of worldview. We suspend disbelief. We suspend disbelief when we walk into even cartoons like or something like the Lego Movie, and we can say that wouldn't really happen that way, but we suspend our disbelief in order for the movie to communicate with us. In general, people don't want anything to do with the supernatural in the church, but are extremely gullible and are willing to believe anything else, magic, um, people coming back from the dead, issues of resurrection, many times is what they're being told or what they're seeing in theaters. Even some of these horror films that are not one of the things that I enjoy very much. Oftentimes, they pick up on issues of the supernatural that people wouldn't otherwise be willing to see or hear when they were in a church or even step foot in a church to try and hear about the supernatural. But they'll suspend their disbelief long enough to go into the movie theater and have a good time doing it. We can use some of the other things to help guide people back to the supernatural of God. Maybe a hunger for the supernatural. They have a hunger for the supernatural, but not necessarily the church. So they're willing to accept anything as supernatural. Maybe we can tie into that. Through technology, we're forced to say this can't happen, so there must be a natural explanation. And talking about movies and coming into a suspended sense of disbelief, we need to realize that in talking to non-Christians, if they don't suspend even for a moment their belief in whatever reality they now have into disbelief for a moment, we cannot convert them. With movies, we suspend belief for disbelief so we can enter into the film. Like falling in love, we suspend disbelief altogether for disbelief so we can enjoy the falling in love process. Again, let me emphasize this. We need to recognize that if non-Christians, if they don't suspend even for a moment their disbelief in whatever their current set of reality is, whatever their reality now is, into disbelief for a moment, we cannot convert them. So we have to allow them to try and believe in something other than their current system, because we all believe in something. So we believe that we need to engage them in disbelief in what their current system is to try and convince them about the kind of belief that will really change their lives. See, people love to go to movies and may suspend their disbelief in the supernatural when they may not seek the supernatural otherwise. So, movies may help us take the non-believer into a state of disbelief in whatever they currently believe. If they do not suspend their belief for disbelief, we will not convert them. We do not hold to know absolute truth absolutely. We can't see it all. We will call this the territory. But by faith, we accept that we have the best map, Scripture and the church, to the territory, the whole absolute truth. If we want to show the map to the territory, all we encounter will have to abandon, even for a moment, their disbelief. If we want to show the map to the territory, then we have to have them suspend their disbelief. The importance of looking at a meta-narrative. John Eldredge, in a note and looking at the larger meta-narrative in video, he says, the meta-narrative, the story above all the stories, that captures and contains all stories that fall underneath all of it, that in some way every other story reflects this one. Movies including Gladiator, the film's director was not attempting to make a Christian film, but unknowingly reflected a larger meta-narrative. So even though he wasn't trying to look at the whole of the film in a Christian way, he really unknowingly reflected something larger that had a meta-narrative, that had a Christian undertone to it because of the God that we serve. Michael Sleesman calls the stories that reflect the larger story deep structures or cultural existentials. In other words, movies, sometimes by design and other times outside of design, reflect the larger embedded story that God has given the world. Sleesman writes, these deep structures are embedded at the core of culture, and while some appear particularly situated to a given location, many others are common to all human experience and thus express a shared humanity. This latter category of deep structures we will term cultural existentials and includes, among others, our relational nature and our desire to hope, our temporal orientation to the future. Another quote in regards to this whole structure comes from Johnston again. Movies are life stories that both interpret us and are being interpreted by us. The power of film can change lives and communicate truth. It can reveal and it can redeem. Part of this revealing and redeeming comes when we understand both frame of reference and understanding the suspension of disbelief when we walk uh, into a movie. Now I want to give you several approaches to film. There are several theological approaches to a film. One of them is going to be avoidance. Avoidance is an ethical posture that always moves from their theological perspective to the film. If you will think, a couple weeks ago, I gave you several approaches to culture in large, and if you wanted to, you could put them on a linear line from left being extremely conservative or right being extremely conservative and left being extremely liberal in looking at how we approach culture. Well, much the same is true when we look at movies. On the extreme right hand side, we have avoidance. The only perspective is the one that the person walks into the movie having their theological perspective to the film. Herbert Miles' Movies and Morals, Hyman Appleman labeled movies to be next to liquor, the outstanding menace to America and to the world. They, talking about movies, are the organ of the devil, the idol of sinners, the sink of infamy, the stumbling block of human progress, the moral cancer of civilization, the number one enemy of Jesus Christ. There are some good teachings in the movies, yes, and there is some good paper in the wastebasket, but it is only to be used when it is impossible to secure paper from any other source. So the avoidance is fairly clear there in regards to how it views movies. The avoidance is about looking at it and throwing it away. Another approach is going to be the cautious or the caution approach. The caution approach takes the film seriously, but focus response on film's ethical stances. A quote that might get at this: my basic posture toward film as a medium is increasingly skeptical, and any list of all-time favorites I could put together would be rather short. That said, I stress the medium's power and add that to ignore it would be folly. For the most part, they see that movies are too often in the business of theological subversion. Thus, they advise caution for the religious viewer. In some ways, I look at this cautious approach as sometimes what is advocated by folks like Focus on the Family and their weekly movie review that really is about counting the amount of cuss words or the amount of nudity that might be in a particular movie without really asking the question about the story in the movie. So it is taking film seriously, but the focus is really on the ethical stances and the morals in the movie. Maybe this would again be represented by folks who count cuss words or nude scenes or sex scenes or perhaps a story about a gay man or a gay woman. Interestingly enough, I would say while we as Christians don't agree with those kind of lifestyles, there may be opportunity for us to capitalize on something redemptively and for the gospel, even when viewing a film that lifestyle-wise we may not agree with. Another approach to film is this: dialogue. Dialogue is the desire for theology to inform their film viewing and for film viewing to inform their theology. I would say that in large part, this is what I would hope for from all of us who are in this class. That dialogue would be where we're at, that we would like our theology to inform our viewing of films and our films to inform our theology in some way. A quote that may get at this is, to judge it advisable to first look at a movie on its own terms and let the images themselves suggest meaning and direction is not to make theology of secondary importance. Religious faith is primary. But such theologizing should follow, not precede the aesthetic experience. Although theology is the final authority for life, or should be, people are best served in the dialogue between theology and film if the movie's vision of life is first received with a maximum of openness before it is brought to the bar of judgment. In other words, we dialogue with the film. Yes, we recognize that theology trumps the movie, but we have to allow the movie to speak for itself. Again, in the very last line, although theology is the final authority, or should be, people are best served in the dialogue between theology and film if the movie's vision of life is received with a maximum openness before it's brought to the bar of judgment. So before you make all of your judgments, perhaps try and understand the story before you try and count cuss words, etc. The appropriate. This is primarily an approach that just simply says the film begins the deliberations and later their own theological perspectives come to play. While it is in many ways like the dialogue, the issue is that the film only primarily gets to ask questions, and so therefore theology does not have as large a role to play. On the far left, the approach is going to be divine encounter. The film begins and dominates the theological perspective. There is no new theology. There is no critical view in the watching of a film. It simply gets to set the pace for all the conversations that follow. If I can, I'd really like now to give you some tools for interpreting movies and film. One of the things that I want you to know is I want you to know the pertinent data related to the film. Each of these can affect the outcome and shape and the message of the film. As you look at this list that I'm about ready to give you, one of the things that I'd like you to keep in mind is that I really, when I'm asking you to do these movie précis, these summaries of movies and think critically through them, I've given you examples the very first week of class. Please check your Moodle accounts for those examples and the templates for what I'm exactly asking for. I'll be asking you for all of these particular elements to interpreting movies and film. So you have to know the pertinent data. I want all of this pertinent data to be available when I look at your movie précis. I want to know the title. I want to know the date of production And the release? Why might I want to know the date of production and release? Well, I may want to know the date of production and release because movies are oftentimes reflecting issues that are going on in present culture. Take, for instance, The Wizard of Oz. If we were to observe The Wizard of Oz in a close-up story, recognizing the date of production and release, there was a great deal going on in U.S. history at that moment. According to Duvall and Hayes, they write this: if we observe the story closely, and if we start to poke around into the historical background of the time Baum wrote the book, The Wizard of Oz, a different meaning surfaces. It's not simply a fun story with Dorothy and some nice friends. One of the hottest political debates going on in America when Baum wrote this story was over the issue of whether America should continue to use the gold standard as the basis for the U.S. dollar, or whether she should switch to silver. This historical context suggests that the main line of the book, Follow the Yellow Brick Road, may be a reference to the central political issue of the day. Remember that although the Yellow Brick Road led to the Great Wizard of Oz, once Dorothy arrived there, she discovered he was a fraud. Dorothy's real hope lay in her shoes. In Baum's book, the shoes are silver. Hollywood changed them to ruby so they would show up better in color for the movie. So perhaps the book falls into the classification of political satire. According to this line of interpretation, the characters in this story then probably represent different segments of American society. The Scarecrow perhaps represents the farmers. Maybe they have no brains. Who would the Tin Man or the Woodsman represent? The factory worker? Perhaps no heart. And the Cowardly Lion perhaps represents the political leadership of the country. We also met the Wicked Witch of the East. Maybe it's the East Coast establishment. And the Wicked Witch of the West Coast establishment. And who is the heroine? Middle America, Dorothy from Kansas. So anyway, one of the things that I want you to begin to look at as pertinent data is recognizing when the film came out, when it was released, when it was produced. All of these things are very important. As I've already mentioned, you're going to need to know the origin. Is this a book? Is it a play? Is it a theater? Is it a history, etc.? We have lots of films that are coming out these days in regards to history. Again, I've already told you that one of the things that films do is they educate, even at times, about history. We had Pearl Harbor, and maybe people look at that Pearl Harbor as education on what really happened that day. Or perhaps the Titanic with Leonardo DiCaprio. In many ways, I certainly would hope that that is not the case. However, many times we need to take into account what the origin is. You need to know about the studio company. All studio companies have their own biases. The studio company has biases and a direction of belief that they definitely want to take people. I want you to look at the director. Who is the director? How might it affect the outcome of the movie? Think about the movies that we know and love that have been made by Steven Spielberg. It's interesting. We would expect Spielberg to do a movie on the Holocaust in Schindler's List. But it's interesting in some of the other movies that Spielberg has done that this Jew gives rise to the Bible as the hope for the world. Perhaps it is that Steven Spielberg himself is searching in these movies. So the director and this director's beliefs and whole background are important. Who produces the movie? Who are the potential celebrities in the film? Each of the four above, the celebrities, the producers, the directors, the studios, they all have their agenda. we might need to be aware of what their agenda is and what they most want to communicate. For example, in a recent film that I watched with my bride, it's called Elysium with Matt Damon. And what I found was that Matt Damon is constantly looking for justice for people, which is a good thing. We want people to pursue justice. He wants justice and people's rights, and he thinks a lot of healthcare. Well, when I watched the Elysium, I couldn't help get away from the fact that Matt Damon was the main character, and the main plot, in my estimation, is really all about healthcare. Every major scene in that entire movie is all about healthcare. And so you have Matt Damon and no doubt a studio backing some political issues in regards to equal health care for all people. Of course, you know and I know that in the American context right now, health care is a very big issue. And so the film capitalizes on some of that. If there was any rewards, this might be pertinent data. What is the rating of the film? Is another piece of pertinent data. Perhaps you can imagine why was the film rated as it was and look into that. You're also going to want to place in its context. Place the film in its context. First of all, you're going to want to place the film in its cinematography and its cinematographic context. Say that 10 times fast. But you're going to want to place it in the cinematographic context. What are other movies by the same director or producer? Perhaps there is a manner of looking at these movies that you can begin to pick up on key themes. Is this a remake? Are there parallel movies that are like it, that are similarly themed? We have not only mystery genres, but you have movies that oftentimes will try and parallel themselves with one another. Are there other parallel movies? Is this a movie in a series? Certainly, as I've said before, the historical and cultural context of a movie. What in the world impacts the film? What in the actual world is impacting this film? Is there politics that are impacting this film? Are there current events or issues impacting this film? Perhaps you could look at it when you look at sitcoms like Law and Order. Oftentimes, Law and Order, at the very beginning of the show, would say, hey, this isn't really about real events. But it is really fiction acting like real events. Oftentimes I've watched Law and Order and said, well, I know that they're not going after real events here, but they're acting like real events. So there is a history and a culture and a setting behind the sitcom or the movie. And what is that? What makes this film impact us culturally? More on interpreting the movie. Certainly need to outline the plot. There's all sorts of questions to be asked when we are outlining the plot. First of all, what is the protagonist and the antagonist? Who are they? Identify them. What is their aim? What do they want out of this? What do they want out of life? What are the obstacles that are causing conflict? What are the resolutions of the conflict? Remember, if you've ever had me in class, that there is a narration bell. There's got to be some rising conflict. Right at the top, you're going to get perhaps the climax. What's the climax of the movie? Where does this plot climax out? And then as you descend, what is the resolution of the film? It's interesting that sometimes the resolution to the film is no resolution at all. I'm thinking of the film with Tom Hanks in it, Castaway. And we reach an epic uh, climax when he's on the island and we believe him to be able to get out and he's in the ocean all by himself. He loses Wilson. This may be the climax of the film. He's moved on because he decides not to open one package. This builds the conflict of the movie. Will he be able to get back? Will he be able to get back to the ones that he's loved? And then the resolution of the film seems to be, well, no resolution at all. All we see is him coming to a four-way stop at the end of the movie, and he gets to choose which way to go. This is the resolution to the movie. He's delivered the package, and now his life is going to continue. Which direction will he take? Are there any hidden agendas? I was just talking earlier this last week with a colleague of mine in regards to sometimes the hidden agendas in movies to try and highlight social issues. Maybe even if we were to see movies like Wall-E, we would see that there's maybe some political agenda taking place. Maybe it's about the climate. In Wall-E, you'll remember that there is this robot. All of the Earthlings have gone away from Earth. There's only just a little bit of plant life, and everything else has been destroyed. It's interesting in the same sort of in the same vein, a recent Tom Cruise movie kind of picked up on that same theme. Everything has been destroyed, but there's very little life, and it tries really to almost blur the lines between what is human and non-human. Of course, the redemptive value of that particular movie is that it chooses the side of life. It chooses the human element as opposed to anything else. But are there hidden agendas? Certainly when looking at movies, we need to enter into an idea of character development. Who are the central figures? What's taking place in their lives? Are they facing some paralysis or growth or decline or fragmentation or redemption? One of the things that I would have you try and notice is the Christ figure in the movies. Oftentimes we will see a Christ figure. But in certain films, the Christ figure is a primary metaphor, or the Christ story functions significantly as a defining theme, not necessarily just as a Christ figure, giving shape to the whole narrative. When this is the case, any criticism of the movie that fails to notice this theme is incomplete. In 1995, you saw Dead Man Walking. There is a theme of this whole Christ-like figure. In Star Wars, you certainly are going to find Christ-like figures. In The Green Mile in 1999, you are definitely going to have Christ-like figures. Sometimes the Christ-like figures will take positioning of like a crucifixion. Other times, there's going to be initials such as JC, as what we see in The Green Mile in 1999. The hero is John Coffey, who sacrifices himself to be the hero for all that is good. Even in One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest in 1975, are we going to see this example of a Christ-like figure, a Christ story in the movies. So many times you're going to get this sacrificial Savior figure in the movies. Just be looking for it, especially in these hero movies. It's interesting as I have gotten into some of these new remakes of comic books, and even some of the darker ones like Batman. I have seen several movies in several different occasions that are trying to demonstrate the hero as someone who is like crucified or someone who has a sacrificial savior kind of figure. It's interesting to note how popular these are. And then we begin to recognize what opportunities might exist because people need a savior. We just have the opportunity to show them the right one. One of the scenes that I'm going to be showing you and that you can go to right now on your Moodle account is the gladiator final scene. We have this gladiator looking like a crucified savior of Rome. And we, of course, have the conflict um, between the main character played by Russell Crowe and the evil man, played by River Phoenix in this whole story of power. And we find that it is sacrifice that shows the true power. And anyway, when you come down to the very nitty gritty of that movie, The Gladiator, what you'll find is its hope. You'll notice that throughout the movie, there is this great hope of being able to go home and being really able to go beyond. And so you even get a sense of eschatology in this film of Gladiator. Even though the director may have not intended it in this way, what we definitely see is that we live our lives in light of the end. And so we see this with this character constantly yearning for that which is going to end, that which is hopeful and beyond. And so he is faithful to what he believes so that he might join his family in the afterlife. What a powerful, powerful picture that we can try and take advantage of with people who are going and loving the movie. It's stirring them to hope. It's stirring them to try and live their lives in something greater than themselves. So be very aware of the Christ figures in the movies. I want to take you now to the cinematography of the movies. I just want to take just a few minutes to help you begin to understand how cinematography actually shapes the message of the movie itself. There is montage or mise en scène. It is a French word that talks about scene analysis. Montage is really about, or mise en scène, if you get into film study, is about the management of space. Every available detail in a scene in the use of space. What I would encourage you to do right now as I talk about mise en scène is go to Citizen Kane. If you want to look at any book or any example of cinematography in regards to movies, the continual movie that will always be mentioned is Citizen Kane by Orson Welles. He marked every single detail, every editing addition in just enormously brilliant ways. So if you look at Citizen Kane in the early childhood scene, what I would have you look at around seconds 47 to 1 minute and 51 seconds, what you have is this young child, this young Charlie Kane, and he's outside playing in the snow with his sled Rosebud. And this is the scene that really sets up the entire movie. But I want you to notice the staging of the scene. You have these three adults arguing over Charlie's future. And in the background, through the window pane, you have Charlie playing in the background in the snow. And really, this establishes the meaning of the movie. How they use space. This scene actually is used in cinematography schools to try and say this is how you use space most effectively. It really does set up the tension and the conflict that you're going to notice throughout the movie. Charlie is constantly wanting to get back to his childhood. And he wants constantly to go back to his childhood and be happy. But in the process, he's going to try and be happy. And in the process, he's going to hurt people. So, Citizen Kane, look at that early childhood scene. The other scene that I found recently is in regards to the new Godfather. The Godfather series is very well done, earned many rewards or no, many awards. And this scene of him becoming the Godfather, his wife comes to him and says, "Have you done these bad things? Have you killed other people so that you might become the Godfather?" This sort of thing, and he says, "Don't you know? Tell me about my business." But in the scene, it's so well done. You have this scene in close-ups in the darkness of his office, and then it pans out. She goes out to get him a drink, comes up close to her, and in the background, through the doorway, you see him as he's congratulated by the other fathers as now being the new Godfather as the door slowly closes, not only on the doorway, but really on their marriage, because now he has lied to her, and what is most important is that he is the Godfather. So look at the scene. It's mise en scène. It's space management. What does the director do with light? What does the director do with the absence of light or shot angles? I'll show you in a minute. Another one of the Citizen Kane video clips that I want you to look at is Orson Welles, just brilliant in his time, understood that shot angles make a difference in how we see and show emotion. And so, shooting up at someone from an angle is about showing intimidation, a position of intimidation, which certainly fits Charles Kane in the video. But not only that, we see music and zooming. Zooming is about showing a technique of emotion. When we have the camera zoom in on someone, it's because the director wants us to try and gain something about the emotions being shown and experienced, and wants us to experience them with them. Certainly, movement versus rest. What is going on in regards to the movement? Maybe it's slow motion. Slow motion can help us see emotion or effect in the movie, and or help us to see what otherwise we could not. Think about the recent Sherlock Holmes movies in the 2010s, in the slow scenes to help us see what our eyes would not otherwise pick up on. If we were to go back and I were to mention music, I put a iconic scene in the opening of Jaws in the 3-minute column in regards to the music of Jaws. Dun, 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 and just how the music shapes the movie. How we find ourselves afraid when we look at Jaws, or how we maybe recognize that a love scene is coming by the music, or if we're in a mystery movie, how keying in on the music does something to us physiologically. So there's all sorts of things to be thinking about in the cinematography. Maybe it's the props and the costumes and how things are moved, and it's the composition and the spacing and the depths of field and the distance of the shot, or where the shot happens to be. Is it above? Is it below? Is it zoomed in? Maybe it's this spatial relationship between people and objects. Another thing that we need to keep in mind is editing. Editing is so crucial when we begin to understand movies in a cinematographic way. Editing is not the management of space like the mise-en-scène is. Editing is the management of time. Where do you cut and how do you splice the pieces of the film? Edwin Porter said this: editing creates a story, emotional, psychological impact on the audience. In the end, wouldn't we want to edit our own life and take out the bad parts? W.E. Griffin said, W.E. Griffin did more than anyone to advance storytelling tools. Use the close-ups, flashbacks, parallel, invisible cut. The movie, the more invisible we are, the editor wrote, the better we are at doing our jobs. So all of these different things create in us some sense of emotion. There's an old film in which Kevin Costner is an army soldier during the time of the Civil War who is sent out west, but he doesn't really have a post, and he's all by himself, and we hear his journals. And the editing in that movie really, really does help make the movie. I put several editing clips. One of them is Amadeus and Salieri, in which Salieri burns the cross as he hears Mozart's music playing in his head. It is a wonderful piece of editing. Amadeus, what a fabulous movie. As we see Salieri, who has given his life to God, he has marked his life with celibacy. He has made this deal with God that God will let him be the most famous composer of all, and he's given up everything in order to make this deal with God. And it turns out that Mozart, this pagan person who thinks nothing of God, is far, far greater and is far superior in as a composer than Salieri will ever become. And so what you see is Salieri will even try and test God. He tests God by bringing Mozart's own wife in. He knows that Mozart is hard up on funds, and so he brings Mozart's wife in and tests God by saying, come in and sleep with me, and I will make sure that Mozart is well paid in the palace and that he has the money that you guys can survive. And this is a test. This is Salieri testing God in regards to the vow that he's made to celibacy. But the editing in this regard, as it goes back and forth from the music, and then finally as Salieri burns the cross, it is a very powerful scene. Another editing masterpiece is really The Godfather again and the baptism murders. As you look at these scenes of editing, as you look on these YouTube clips, just let me warn you that there is some violence in the Godfather baptism murders, but it is a tremendous, tremendous look at the kind of editing that is done. You see a dad baptizing his son, renouncing Satan and all of his works, as in the background he has ordered the hit on a bunch of different people. So it really, really does matter, the editing. If you look at this next slide, zooming effect that I was telling you about, not only the zooming but also the camera angle. Citizen Kane here, the angle of intimidation certainly being a part of this whole thing. Help you in on getting to the central messages and the worldview of a movie, really by asking several questions. What does film say about humanity or the nature of human existence? What is this movie attempting to say about human nature? What does this film say about God, or the church, or the universe, or or ethics, or the way we should go about ethics? What does it say about life and death and health and the value of life? Some movies devalue life, while other movies highlight life. Some movies try and tear down, and we can actually feel more dehumanized in leaving the movie than when we entered into the movie. Movies that devalue human life um, by talking down authority figures or maybe parents. Or interestingly enough, several years ago, Cider House Rules, we hear this story of a boy, of a young man who knows how to do abortions and is really thrust into this whole affair of doing abortions. And we look at that and we think, I leave maybe more dehumanized than when I went in. And so we have to make judgment calls on what movies and the central message of the movie is. Part of the question we ask is, well, how should I respond to this movie? How are Christ and God dealt with in the movie? Are they thought of positively or negatively? How is religion viewed? One of the things that you might think of as how people handle the church or handle God in movies is the more recent movie Doubt. And you have Meryl Streep in this particular movie, and it deals with the church and priests and sexual scandal. How should we view that? What kind of messages should we be getting out of that? What issues make it difficult to be used in a transcendent way? This might be an obstacle for us looking at movies and trying to use them in a redemptive, God-honoring way. Oftentimes, God and the church or Christ are used with in all different sorts of ways, and we need to key in on that. Are they appreciative of the church, of God? Are they mocking God? Are they trivializing? Is it a privatized or a secularized view? Is it an idealized or a demonized view of God or the church or Christ? And then we need to decide, well, can we use this movie in a transcendent way? Is there some redemptive value that we can draw upon in this movie to be used for the gospel? One of the advantages is to be able to look at where are the redemptive aspects to this film? What are the issues in the film that allow us to be redemptive and transcendent and uplifting for the sake of the gospel? Maybe if we were to look at Gladiator again, maybe if we were to begin to look at hope and that eschatological view that I mentioned earlier about our lives being lived in light of the end, we'll see tremendous transcendent value and the hope that everybody is longing to get at. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed this lecture. Let me give you a couple other scenes that I have given you in your views for this particular week, and I expect that you would look at all of them. The War with Kevin Costner is really about two families that disagree, and not only the two families that disagree, but the war that goes on with himself as the main character. But this is a scene that I've given you of great redemptive value, of love and grace, and how we can go about that. Perhaps you could even remember the Ice Age. And we can ask the question, how could we become a more diverse church as these different characters are represented and one of the main characters, even in this cartoon, says, "We are one weird herd." Indeed, we are one weird herd, but certainly we can learn to love and get along with one another. So I hope that you will engage in all of these movies, in all of these ways, and you'll begin to understand the language of pop culture. And in this case, primarily, that you will begin to understand the language of movies. Hope you have a great week. God bless you, and I will sign off. God bless.